Hello again, sports fans. This is the first real range test of my reasonably new Volantex Ranger. So far it's mainly been used to search for a model that went off the air a couple of weeks ago and flew away to the north. That model has now been returned by a local farmer, so I can now get back to setting the Ranger up as my main long-range FPV platform. I arrive out at the field just after lunch, and unfortunately the wind has blown up a little bit unexpectedly. It seems to be gusting between 10 and 15 kilometres an hour, and at the moment it's coming from the north, which is to the right, but it's really inconsistent. It's swinging round to the west and to the south and back again. So I decided I'll at least put it up in the air and then I'll work out what my options are. So she goes off easily enough to the northwest, and the plan is to get her up to around 100 metres and put her in loiter mode and see how she's handling the wind. So she's at about 130 metres when I flip the switch and put her in the loiter mode, and she immediately turns and starts circling. But she does lose a fair bit of altitude quite quickly. I've seen that sort of behaviour on previous flights, but it usually makes up the lost altitude on the next circuit. But that doesn't seem to be the case today. I let her circle for quite a while and she keeps on coming down, even after I start messing around a bit with the throttle. And eventually I have to put in some elevator to regain some altitude. The wind seems to have picked up considerably since I launched, and I suspect that that's what's causing the problems. But I decide I'll put it in pilot assist mode and see if that handles it any better. I take her up to about 150 metres and line her up roughly on the river valley that I normally fly down on my long range flights. And even though it gets a bit bumpy, the Tornado doesn't seem to have any difficulty maintaining a steady course and altitude. So I decide to carry on for a while, and by the time I reach the 1 kilometre mark I'm up at about 220 metres. The wind seems to have settled down a bit. There's only about 10k difference between the airspeed on the left of the screen and the ground speed on the bottom right. So I'm fairly happy, and I decide I'll continue climbing till I get to about 400 metres and then take the hands off the stick and let the Tornado fly it. And that happens at about the 2 kilometre mark. So the Tornado seems to be handling everything perfectly, and then it starts to get a little bit bumpy. It looks like the wind has picked up substantially and is now blowing at around about 30 kilometres an hour. It's certainly making the Tornado earn its keep, but it's doing a good job of maintaining the heading and altitude despite the buffeting it's getting. Down on the ground the wind still seems to be coming mostly from the north, but it looks like up here there's more west in it. It's coming from the right hand side. I'm not overly concerned though. I've still got heaps left in the battery, even if I have to fight a headwind all the way back. So the video reception's been pretty good up to this point, but round about the 4 kilometre mark I generally do experience some loss of signal as we pass the mountain, and today's no different. I just need to rotate the antenna slightly and the picture comes back fairly strong. If I can believe my airspeed sensor, the wind seems to have died down to a mere 20 kilometres an hour. It does seem to be coming more from the side though. I'm getting hit with some quite strong gusts that are rocking the Ranger, but the Tornado seems to be bringing it back level without too much trouble. I lose the signal for a couple of seconds after a particularly strong gust tips the wing over. And I apply a bit of aileron to bring the nose back around to the left-hand side of the valley where the signal is generally a bit better. Then give control back to the Tornado. So I'm still fairly happy with how it's going until the plane suddenly takes a turn to the right and I notice that the autopilot mode has come on. It switches back to heading hold mode fairly quickly, but even in that short time with the wind now behind me, I've travelled a fair bit back towards home. I'm not sure what happened, but I decide I'll turn back around and carry on with the flight while I have a bit of a think about it. Everything seems to have settled down. She's maintaining a fairly level course at the moment. But then, just before reaching the 5 kilometre point, she goes back into autopilot mode and turns around once more. And this time I decide I'll take the hint and head home. She's behaving like she's lost radio signal and gone into failsafe mode, but the failsafe's been set to switch to return to home mode. So I'm not really sure what's going on. I decide to switch it manually into return to home mode and navigate over to the eastern side of the valley to make sure I give the mountain a wide berth when I release the sticks and let the Tornado take me home. Which is what I've just done here. So in moving over to the other side of the valley, I fly out of the beam of my receiver antennas and need to make some adjustments to get the picture back. When I do get the picture back, I can see I am in return to home still and I'm maintaining a steady and level course, but I'm not heading directly home. According to the speed readouts, with the wind behind me, I'm now doing 100 kilometres an hour ground speed with an airspeed of only 60 kilometres an hour. So it looks like the wind has increased to 40 kilometres an hour, and I'm pretty sure it is coming out of the west, and I'm guessing that that's what's preventing the Ranger from heading directly home. I'll let it go for a while, but eventually add some manual aileron input in to straighten her up a bit. She doesn't seem to be having any trouble maintaining the new course, but still doesn't head directly for home. When I'm just about due east of it, I decide I'll make the turn manually and head more directly into the wind and see if that helps. Surprisingly, the wind seems to die away completely. There's no longer much variation between the ground and the airspeeds at all. Once I'm inside a kilometre and can clearly see where I'm going, I decide to switch off the motor and lose some of that altitude before landing. I'm manually applying some down elevator, but the Tornado is still taking care of the ailerons. So she comes down nice as pie, and I set up for a landing, and I think because I took off to the north, I've decided to land to the north, completely ignoring the fact that the wind has switched around and is now blowing from the south. While the wind isn't blowing anywhere near as hard down here, it's still giving me a fair push up the backside, and I land fairly long. So despite getting out and back in one piece, I still had some serious concerns about how this flight went. I was particularly worried about why it had switched itself into autopilot mode when I was almost 5 kilometres out. As it turns out though, and as is usually the case, it was my own stupid fault. In order to get the waypoint functionality working correctly, I'd had to change the switching values on my Turnigy radio. And I'd also decided to assign the return to home function to a different switch. And of course I forgot to reset the failsafe function to take account of that change. So what happened is that when the failsafe acted at 4.8 kilometres, it put the flight controller into autopilot mode rather than return to home mode. And because the first waypoint was set back towards home, the plane naturally turned round, regained the signal and went back into PA mode. So why did the Easy UHF go to failsafe at only 5 kilometres, I hear you ask? And the answer is that I was flying it in low power mode rather than high power mode. So all things considered, including the weather, I'm very happy with the way the Ranger performed today. And I'm looking forward to an assault on my 9.5 kilometre record in the very near future.